The year was 1803. Two white guys, one enslaved black man, and a teenage indigenous girl with a newborn baby on her back. Lewis and Clark walked 8,000 miles across unmapped wilderness to the Pacific Ocean. Only one person died. You will have to watch to the end to know how they actually pulled it off. President Thomas Jefferson had just dropped $15 million on the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. The United States doubled in size overnight. The problem was, nobody really knew what was out there. Could be gold, could be monsters. It could be a water route straight to the Pacific that would make America rich. Jefferson needed answers. So he tapped his personal secretary, Meriwether Lewis, a 29-year-old Army captain who spoke several native languages and had spent time on the frontier. Lewis knew he couldn't do this alone, so he called up his boy William Clark, a 33-year-old retired officer he'd served with in the Army. The two of them started building what they called the core of discovery. Now here's where it gets real. Clark brought along York, the enslaved man who'd been his companion since they were kids. York was about 6 feet tall and 200 pounds of pure muscle, and he had skills. This brother could hunt, track, handle weapons, navigate rivers, and survive in the wilderness. But because of the color of his skin, he wasn't even an official member of the expedition. He was a property, yet he'd end up being crucial to their survival in ways nobody expected. They recruited about 45 men total, soldiers and volunteers who could hunt and handle themselves in the wild. And they packed everything: weapons, medical supplies, gifts for native tribes, scientific instruments, journals, and a 5-5-foot keelboat they nicknamed the Barge. On May 14, 1804, they pushed off from Camp Dubois near Street Louis and started heading up the Missouri River. Right away, nature said, "Not today." Heat was brutal. Mosquitoes attacked in swarms so thick the men's faces would swell up. The river fought them every single day as they poled, pushed, and pulled their 10-ton boat upstream, making maybe 10 to 20 miles a day if they were lucky. Within the first month, 2/3 of the crew had boils and ulcers all over their bodies. They had dysentery from contaminated river water, chafed thighs, blistered feet, sunburn, and pure exhaustion. But they kept going. On August 20th, 1804, they suffered their only death. Sergeant Charles Floyd, the youngest member, died from what was probably a ruptured appendix. There was nothing Lewis or Clark could do. They buried him on a bluff overlooking the river near what's now Sioux City, Iowa, and kept moving. As they traveled through present-day Nebraska and South Dakota, they started encountering Native American tribes. The strategy was always the same. Lewis and Clark would announce that this land now belonged to the United States and that President Jefferson was their new great father. They'd hand out peace medals and American flags. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. The meeting with the Teton Sioux near modern-day Pierre, South Dakota, got tense. The Sioux thought the Corps were merchants trying to sell weapons to rival tribes. Communication broke down because they were translating from English to French to a native language and back again. Things almost turned violent, but somehow they talked their way out. And York? Native Americans had never seen a black man before. They were stunned. Some thought he was a spirit being. York would show off his strength and tell them wild stories, and the tribes were so fascinated that it actually helped the expedition. Lewis and Clark used York's presence as a diplomatic tool. But let's be clear, York wasn't doing this because he wanted to. He was enslaved. He had no choice. By late October 1804, they reached Mandan and Hidatsa villages in what's now North Dakota, about 1,600 miles from where they started. Winter was coming hard, so they built Fort Mandan and settled in. Temperatures dropped to 40 degrees below zero. Frostbite was everywhere. One young native boy came to the fort with frozen feet, and Lewis ended up having to amputate his toes. During that winter, they met a French-Canadian trader named Toussaint Charbonneau. Dude was a coward and a mess, but he had something they needed. His wife, Sacagawea, a 16-year-old Shoshone woman who'd been kidnapped from her tribe at age 12 and forced into marriage. She was 6 months pregnant. Lewis and Clark hired Charbonneau as an interpreter, and Sacagawea came along. On February 11th, 1805, she gave birth to a son, Jean-Baptiste. Clark nicknamed him Pomp. 2 months later, in April, Sacagawea strapped that newborn baby to her back in a cradleboard, and the expedition headed west. Sacagawea wasn't just along for the ride. She saved Lewis and Clark's journals and important papers when their boat nearly capsized in the Missouri River. She found edible plants that kept them from starving. She made moccasins and clothing. And her presence, along with little Pomp's, told native tribes they encountered that this wasn't a war party. Who brings a woman and baby to battle? The real test came in summer 1805 when they hit the Rocky Mountains. Jefferson had told them there'd be an easy water route to the Pacific. He was dead wrong. The Rockies were massive, snow-covered, and brutal. In August, they desperately needed horses from the Shoshone tribe to cross the mountains. When Sacagawea started interpreting at the meeting with the Shoshone chief, she realized something wild. The chief was her brother Kameawait. She hadn't seen him since she was kidnapped 5 years earlier. She ran to him, crying, embraced him, and then got back to work. Her brother gave them horses. Crossing the Bitterroot Mountains in September nearly killed them. Snow was deep. Food ran out. They were starving, eating portable soup, and whatever they could scrounge. Men were getting dysentery from eating contaminated fish. It got so bad that Clark took a group ahead to hunt while Lewis brought the main party through slowly. They almost didn't make it. When they finally stumbled out of the mountains near present-day Idaho, the Nez Perce tribe saved them with food and help. The expedition would later call the Nez Perce the most hospitable, honest, and sincere people that we have met with in our voyage. They built canoes, rode down the Clearwater and Snake Rivers to the Columbia River, and kept pushing west. On November 7, 1805, Clark wrote in his journal, "Ocean in view. Oh, the joy." Except, he was wrong. What he saw was the Columbia River estuary. But a few weeks later, on November 15, they actually reached the Pacific Ocean. Here's something beautiful. When they had to decide where to build their winter fort, they took a vote. Every single member of the Corps got to vote, including Sacagawea and York. A teenage native girl and an enslaved black man had voices that mattered, at least in that moment. They built Fort Clatsop on the south side of the Columbia River and spent a miserable winter there. It rained all but 12 days. Their clothes literally rotted off their backs. They ran out of tobacco in March and had run out of whiskey the previous July 4th, but they survived. On March 23, 1806, they gave Fort Clatsop to the Clatsop chief and started the journey home. The return trip was faster because they knew the way. They split up to explore more territory. Clark took a group down the Yellowstone River. Lewis took another route. On July 27, Lewis's group had their only violent encounter of the entire expedition. 8 Blackfeet warriors tried to steal their horses and guns. In the fight, 2 Blackfeet were killed. Days later, one of Lewis's own men, Pierre Cruzat, accidentally shot Lewis in the buttocks while hunting. Lewis survived, but he was in pain for weeks. On August 12, 1806, the groups reunited at the mouth of the Yellowstone River. With the Missouri Current behind them, they flew downstream, covering up to 70 miles a day. On the 23rd of September 1806, 2 years, 4 months, and 10 days after they left, they rolled back into St. Louis. They were treated like national heroes. The men got double pay and 320 acres of land each. The captains got 1,600 acres. Lewis became governor of the Louisiana Territory. Clark became brigadier general and superintendent of Indian affairs. But Sacagawea, she got nothing. Not a single dollar, not 1 acre of land. Her husband Charbonneau received $533.3 and 320 acres. She returned to the Mandan villages with her family and died 6 years later in 1812 at Fort Manuel, probably from fever. She was about 24 years old. And York? He asked Clark for his freedom based on his service. Clark refused. York asked to be reunited with his wife in Louisville. Clark refused. Instead, Clark hired York out to a brutal slave owner as punishment for daring to ask for freedom. York wouldn't get his freedom for another 10 years, around 1,816. His fate after that remains unclear. Some say he died trying to return to Clark. Others say he lived as a respected member of the Crow Nation in the West. We'll probably never know the truth. The expedition mapped 8,000 miles of uncharted territory. They documented 178 new plants and 122 new animals. They established relationships with dozens of native tribes. They proved there was no easy water route to the Pacific. And they opened the door for westward expansion that would change America forever, for better and for worse. But here's the real story. This expedition succeeded because of people whose contributions have been erased or minimized. An enslaved black man who had no choice but to go. A teenage native girl carrying a baby who saved their lives multiple times. The Nez Perce, Shoshone, Mandan, and Hidatsa, people who fed them, guided them, and kept them alive. Think about what York actually did out there. He hunted game that fed the entire Corps. He worked the oars on that massive keelboat through treacherous currents. He stood guard at night. He scouted ahead. He treated wounds and illness. He was one of the best shots in the group. And when they met native tribes, His presence often broke the ice because people were so fascinated by him that tensions would ease. And after all that, after proving himself as capable as any free man on that expedition, Clark still saw him as property. Sacagawea was just 16 years old, caring for an infant while crossing brutal terrain. She found edible plants when they were starving. She recognized landmarks in Shoshone territory that helped them find the right path. She negotiated with her own people to get horses they desperately needed, and she never got paid a single cent. The native tribes who helped them deserve even more recognition. The Mandan shared food during that brutal winter. The Nez Perce found these starving strangers stumbling out of the mountains and nursed them back to health. Without native assistance, the Corps would have died in those mountains or frozen on the plains. Lewis and Clark get the statues and the rivers named after them, but York, Sacagawea, and the indigenous nations who made it possible, they're the ones who actually carried this expedition on their backs. If this story opened your eyes to the real history behind Lewis and Clark, drop a like and subscribe for more true stories about the people who shaped America but don't always get the credit. Drop a comment and let me know which part of this expedition surprised you most. And if you want to dive deeper into York's story or Sacagawea's life, let me know in the comments what you want to see next. Peace.